ほら、ルフィ、今一緒に海賊になる仲間を探してるんだ。
Hello guys, welcome to my channel The Wandering Zoro, your go-to destination for anime-related content. And if you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest videos. In today's video, we're going to be diving into part 1 of the series. So be sure to stick around until the end, and let's get started. Izuku's POV. My name is Izuku Midoriya, and I was born into a world where the extraordinary is ordinary. Quirks, superhuman abilities that manifest in about 80% of the population, have become the cornerstone of our society. They define who you are, what you can do, and often, your place in the world. But for those of us without these gifts, life is a constant uphill battle. My father, Hisashi, was one of the quirkless minority. He was a gentle soul with kind eyes and a warm smile, but I could always see the shadow of sadness behind his gaze. Life had never been easy for him in a world that valued power above all else. He would often sit with me on our small apartment balcony, pointing out constellations and telling me stories about his homeland in Korea. Those quiet moments, with the city lights twinkling below us, were some of my most treasured memories. One day, he made the difficult decision to return to Korea, promising to stay in touch with my mother, Inko, and me. I remember standing at the airport, my small hand clutched in my mother's as we watched him walk away, turning back every few steps to wave at us until he disappeared through the security gate. For a while, he kept his word. Letters arrived regularly, filled with stories of his life and words of encouragement for us. Sometimes small gifts would accompany them. A traditional Korean snack, a photo of him standing before a historic temple, or a book about Korean myths and legends. His calls, though less frequent, were a lifeline that kept us connected across the distance. I would press the phone tight against my ear, trying to catch every word, every nuance in his voice, storing it away like precious treasure. But then came the day that changed everything. In one of his letters, my father mentioned something called a dungeon, a mysterious phenomenon that had started appearing around the world. The paper was crinkled from how many times I'd read it, tracing his excited handwriting with my fingertips. They say these dungeons hold incredible power, Izuku, he had written. Maybe even something that could help people like us, the quirkless ones. His voice crackled with excitement over the phone as he told us about his plans to explore one. This could change everything, Inko, he said, and I remember how my mother's face had tightened with worry. Be careful, Hisashi, she had replied, her voice soft but strained. We need you to come home safe. I will, he promised. And when I do, things will be different. I'll be different. That was the last time we ever heard from him. He vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions and a void that could never be filled. My mother reported him missing, but the Korean authorities found nothing. It was as if he had simply stepped off the face of the earth, swallowed by one of these mysterious dungeons. Growing up quirkless in this superhuman world was nothing short of a nightmare. Every day was a battle against the cruel taunts and sidelong glances of my peers. They saw me as weak, pitiful, a useless burden on society. Deku, they called me, a play on my name that meant someone who couldn't achieve anything. The nickname stung like salt in an open wound, a constant reminder of my perceived worthlessness. Look at Deku, thinking he can keep up? What's the point of even trying when you don't have a quirk? You're just wasting everyone's time. These words followed me like shadows, impossible to outrun. My childhood friend, Kakin or Katsuki Bakugo, was the worst of them all. With his explosive quirk and equally explosive personality, he made it his mission to remind me daily of my place in the world. What hurt the most was that we had once been inseparable, exploring the woods behind our neighborhood, sharing dreams of becoming heroes. But as his quirk developed and mine never came, that friendship twisted into something ugly and painful. My mother, bless her heart, worked herself to the bone trying to support us. She juggled multiple jobs, coming home late with dark circles under her eyes and hands rough from labor. I could see the toll it took on her, both physically and emotionally. Sometimes I would wait up for her, pretending to be asleep on the couch, just to catch a glimpse of her exhausted face when she thought no one was watching. In those unguarded moments, she would let the cheerful mask slip, revealing the weight of our struggles. She tried her best to encourage me, to tell me I was special in my way, but even her love couldn't bridge the chasm between me and the quirk-blessed children around us. Once, after a particularly bad day at school, she found me crying in my room, surrounded by my hero notebooks. "Izuku," she had whispered, kneeling beside me. "I'm so sorry." Those 4 words held years of guilt and pain. She blamed herself for my quirkless state, though we both knew it wasn't her fault. Genetics were just another lottery in this unfair world. Opportunities that others took for granted were perpetually out of my reach. Sports teams, academic competitions, even simple playground games, all were domains where my quirkless status marked me as an outsider. No matter how hard I tried, how many hours I spent training or studying, there was always an insurmountable wall between me and my dreams. I remember one science fair where I had worked tirelessly on a project analyzing the physics behind different heroes' moves. The judges were impressed by my research until they discovered I was quirkless. Their interest immediately waned, and the prize went to a flashy demonstration of a temperature control quirk instead. It was a harsh lesson in how this world valued inherent gifts over hard work and dedication. Now, at 14 years old, I found myself standing on the edge of a rooftop, my heart as heavy as lead in my chest. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, a beautiful backdrop to my darkest moment. A gentle breeze ruffled my hair, carrying the distant sounds of traffic and life continuing below. Just minutes earlier, I had experienced the greatest high and the lowest low of my young life. I had met my idol, All Might, the #1 hero and the symbol of peace. He was everything I had ever aspired to be: strong, courageous, and universally admired. His mere presence brought hope to those around him, and his booming laugh could dispel fear from even the most terrified hearts. Standing before him, I felt like a candle before the sun. With trembling lips and sweaty palms, I poured my heart out to him. I confessed my deepest dream, the one I had held close to my hero, despite being quirkless. I looked up at him with hope shining in my eyes, silently pleading for even the smallest word of encouragement. But his response was like a dagger to my chest, twisting with every word. Flashback. Can someone without a quirk become a hero like you? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I stood there, painfully aware of how small and insignificant I must have looked to him. My round face, framed by a mop of unruly, dark hair that seemed to defy gravity, was a stark contrast to his chiseled features. My gray eyes, usually brimming with enthusiasm, now shimmered with unshed tears as I awaited his response. The freckles dotting my cheeks in a diamond pattern seemed to stand out more than ever, like constellations of my insecurities. My hands, clutching my scorched notebook, rescued from Kakin's earlier bullying, trembled slightly. The cover was signed, but All Might's signature blazed proudly across it, a moment of joy that now felt distant and hollow. All Might's appearance had changed dramatically from his heroic form. Gone was the towering figure with bulging muscles and a beaming smile. In his place stood a gaunt man, almost skeletal in his thinness. His angular features were accentuated by the shadows cast by the setting sun, and his sunken eyes seemed to look right through me. His blonde hair, usually styled into 2 distinct tufts, now hung limp around his face. I had accidentally discovered his secret, that the symbol of peace was not the invincible hero everyone believed him to be. He had a time limit, and underneath his powerful exterior was a man bearing a grievous wound and its consequences. He regarded me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a voice that seemed to echo with the weight of years of experience, he delivered the crushing blow. "You can't be a hero without a quirk. You gotta be realistic, kid." His words hung in the air between us, each syllable another nail in the coffin of my dreams. There was no room for argument, no glimmer of encouragement in his voice. It was a cold, hard fact, delivered with the finality of a judge's gavel. "It's not bad to dream," he continued, his voice softening slightly. "But you also have to consider what's realistic. The pros are constantly risking their lives. They have to be ready to fight villains with powerful quirks at any moment." I felt the world narrowing around me, his words drowning out everything else. "So no," he said, his gaze direct and unflinching. "I don't think someone without a quirk can become a hero. It's simply too dangerous." As he turned to leave, his baggy white shirt and tan pants fluttering in the rooftop breeze, I felt something inside me crumble. The door closed behind him with a soft click, but to me, it sounded like thunder. Flashback ends. The wind howled as if echoing my turmoil, tugging at my clothes like a relentless specter of despair. I stood on that rooftop, feeling the jagged edges of my shattered dream cut deep into my heart. The night unfolded, a canopy of stars punctuating the darkening sky, yet it felt more like a ceiling closing in on me, suffocating under the weight of my inadequacies. But then, amidst that vastness, there was a flicker of fragile ember of hope. It pulsed gently, igniting a sense of defiance within me. I had spent so many years yearning to be like the heroes who soared through the skies, embodying strength and courage. My longing had morphed into a deep-seated belief that heroism was solely reserved for those with quirks. But what if I could redefine that? What if there was more to being a hero than just having powers? I exhaled, the breath fogging in the cool night air, and with it, I released the pain that had burdened me for so long. A wave of determination washed over me, momentarily drowning out the taunts and jeers that had haunted my every step. I was not merely Deku, a useless, quirkless child. I was more than that, more than the sum of my fears and failures. As if the universe conspired to illuminate my newfound resolve, a distant siren wailed in the night, a clarion call to action echoing through the alleys below. The city was alive, its pulse thrumming in rhythm with my racing heart. I took a step back from the edge, my mind racing with possibilities. If I couldn't punch through buildings like All Might, then perhaps I could find my way to help those in need. The thought sparked a surge of energy, and I turned from the ledge, a newfound sense of purpose guiding my steps. I had always been captivated by the stories of heroes who fought for justice, who saved lives, and who stood tall against villainy. While I may not possess the gifts of others, I could still make a difference if only I could figure out how. As I descended the stairs leading back to the ground, I felt the weight of my decisions settle around me, a mantle of determination. No longer would I allow my lack of a quirk to define me. I could study, train, and hone my mind and body. If I couldn't become a hero in the traditional sense, I would forge a new path, one that didn't require superhuman abilities. I would cultivate my resolve, building a strength that came not from powers, but from heart and will. Once I reached the street, I took a deep breath, inhaling the cool air filled with the mingling scents of the city street food, exhaust, and the faint perfume of blooming flowers from a nearby park. I felt alive, electric with purpose, ready to embrace this new chapter in my life. Time skip. Third-person POV. "I'm home, Mom," Izuku called out as he stepped into their cozy apartment. The familiar scent of home, a mix of his mother's cooking and the faint aroma of fresh laundry wafted through the air, instantly easing the tension in his shoulders. He slipped off his school shoes, placing them neatly by the door. The apartment was small but well kept, with photographs of their family adorning the walls, snapshots of happier times, many including a dark-haired man with kind eyes who bore a striking resemblance to Izuku. Hisashi's presence lingered in these frames, a ghost haunting their home with memories both sweet and painful. Almost immediately, a tiny whirlwind of energy came flying toward him from the depths of the apartment. Ni-chan, a little girl with long, fluffy dark green hair, came barreling down the hallway, her bright emerald eyes sparkling with excitement. She wore a yellow t-shirt with a smiling sun printed on it and blue shorts that showed her scraped knees, evidence of her latest playground adventure. Izuku couldn't help but smile as his 5-year-old sister launched herself at him in a playful tackle. For a moment, the weight of All Might's words lifted from his shoulders. "Whoa there, Izumi-chan." He laughed, catching her mid-leap and spinning her around once. "It's great to see you too." Her giggles filled the apartment, chasing away some of the darkness that had settled in his heart. After they tumbled around for a moment, he hoisted his giggling sister into his arms, her small hands immediately reaching for his hair. "Your face looks sad," she said with the blunt honesty only children possess, poking his cheek. "Did someone mean to you at school again?" Izuku forced a brighter smile. "I'm fine now that I'm home with you," he said, tickling her side and carrying her toward the living room. As he entered, he spotted their mother, Inko Midoriya, setting a steaming bowl of katsudon, his favorite, on the dining table. Her gentle, nurturing presence seemed to fill the space, bringing a sense of comfort that Izuku hadn't realized he'd been craving after such a devastating day. Inko had a slender figure and a warm demeanor that could instantly put anyone at ease. Her large, expressive eyes, a few shades deeper than Izumi's, resembled the rich greens of a forest after rain, currently brimming with kindness and a hint of concern as they met Izuku's gaze. She always seemed to know when something was wrong. "You're late today," she said softly, not accusingly. Falling gracefully past her shoulders, Inko's straight, glossy hair created a brilliant deep green curtain, interrupted only by a small, lively spiky ponytail dancing at her neck's nape, a style she'd adopted for practicality years ago when juggling an infant Izuku and household chores. She smiled warmly, her eyes crinkling at the corners as she watched her children, though Izuku could see the questions behind her gaze. "Welcome home, Izuku," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Dinner's ready. Why don't you two wash up? Izumi's been waiting for you to get home. I made a drawing for you at kindergarten," Izumi announced proudly, squirming to be put down. "It's of you as a hero, with a super cool costume." Izuku felt his throat tighten, but managed to keep his smile in place. "I can't wait to see it. Let's wash our hands first, okay?" After a hearty meal filled with Izumi's excited chatter about her day at kindergarten, how she defended a boy being teased about his quirk that turned his skin purple, how her teacher had praised her reading skills, the family moved to the living room. Izuku remained quieter than usual, pushing food around his plate and giving short answers when addressed directly. Izumi, seemingly oblivious to her brother's mood, tugged at his sleeve as soon as he'd helped clear the table. "Nichan, let's play heroes," she squealed, her small face alight with excitement. "I'll be the sidekick, and you could be the main hero like All Might." Izuku felt a sharp pang in his chest at the mention of All Might, the memory of those crushing words still fresh. But looking at Izumi's hopeful face, her eyes wide with admiration, he couldn't bring himself to disappoint her too. All right, he conceded with a small smile, ruffling her hair. "But just for a little while, okay? It's getting close to your bedtime." "I'm not tired," she protested immediately, even as she tried to stifle a yawn. As any good brother would, Izuku indulged Izumi in her games, lifting her up for flying rescues and pretending to defeat villains with overdramatic poses that made her dissolve into fits of giggles. He played until her eyelids began to droop and her movements slowed, her small body finally surrendering to the day's exertions. "I think it's time for heroes to rest," he said gently, scooping her up. "But I'm not sleepy," she mumbled, even as her head drooped against his shoulder. He gently carried her to her room, decorated with hero posters and twinkling starlights, tucking her in her All Might-themed bed with a soft kiss on her forehead. "Sweet dreams, Izumi-chan," he whispered, lingering in the doorway for a moment to watch her peaceful face, envying the simplicity of her world. The hallway felt longer than usual as he walked back, his mind heavy with decisions and questions. Returning to the kitchen, he found his mother finishing up the dishes, humming softly to herself. The quiet clink of plates and the soft rush of water created a peaceful backdrop as he gathered his courage. "Mom," he began hesitantly, leaning against the counter beside her. "What was Dad really like?" Inko's hand stilled for a moment, soap bubbles sliding down a plate as the question caught her off guard. "Why do you ask, honey?" She replied, her voice careful, measured. She set the plate down and turned to face him fully, searching his expression. Izuku took a deep breath, his fingers fidgeting with the hem of his uniform shirt. "Because I want to know more about my Korean lineage," he said, his voice growing firmer with each word. "About the Sung family, about where he came from. And," he hesitated, then plunged ahead, "I've been thinking about moving away from Japan." Inko's eyes widened, water dripping unnoticed from her hands onto the kitchen floor. "Moving? But Izuku, your whole life is here. Your school, your friends." Her voice trailed off as she realized the painful truth that her son had few, if any, real friends here. "What about your dream of becoming a hero?" she asked softly, reaching for a towel to dry her hands. "You wanted that since you were 4. Izuku's gaze dropped to the floor, his shoulders slumping slightly under the weight of shattered aspirations. "When you have your inspiration for a dream become your disappointment," he said, his voice catching, "when they belittle you for that dream, you tend not to care anymore." He looked up at her, his gray eyes swimming with unshed tears, but also with a new determination. "Maybe there's something else out there for me. Something different." Inko's heart ached at the pain in her son's voice. She quickly finished drying her hands and walked over to him, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Oh, Izuku," she sighed, pulling him into a hug that he didn't resist. She felt him trembling slightly against her, and knew that something significant had happened today, something beyond the usual bullying and disappointments. She pulled back, cupping his face in her hands. "Come," she said gently. "Let's go to the living room. I think it's time we talked about your father and your heritage. There are things I should have told you sooner." As they settled onto the couch, Inko reached for a photo album tucked away on the bottom shelf of their bookcase. One Izuku had rarely seen her open. She took a moment to gather her thoughts, running her fingers over the embossed cover. She knew this conversation would be pivotal for Izuku, and she wanted to choose her words carefully. "Your father wasn't just the quirk-based fire breather I told you about when you were younger," she began, her voice soft but steady. "That was a simplification." Izuku leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" Inko opened the album to reveal photos of a younger version of herself with a tall, lean man with sharp features and kind eyes that resembled Izuku's. Hisashi sung, "He took my name when we married, partly to blend in better here in Japan, came from an old Korean family with unusual traditions and beliefs." She pointed to a series of pictures showing caves and strange rock formations. He was an archaeologist specializing in ancient burial sites and what he called gates between worlds. Most of his colleagues thought he was eccentric at best, delusional at worst. The story of Hisashi Midoriya and their shared past was one filled with love, loss, and unanswered questions, a story that might just help her son find a new path forward, one even she hadn't considered until this moment. Intro. In a world where the fabric of reality had unraveled, humanity found itself staring into the abyss of the impossible. Interdimensional portals, shimmering and alive with otherworldly energy, began to puncture the skies and landscapes of our planet. We called them gates, luminous thresholds that pulsed like the heartbeat of some alien force, tearing through the seams of existence. Beyond these portals lay realms we named dungeons, nightmarish domains crawling with monstrous entities that defied logic and haunted the deepest recesses of our minds. As the world reeled from this cosmic upheaval, a new kind of savior emerged amidst the chaos. They were the hunters, individuals who had awakened to extraordinary powers, their abilities as varied and unpredictable as the dungeons themselves. These brave souls ventured into the gates, risking their lives to shield humanity from the horrors lurking within those shadowed realms. A man named Izuku Midoriya, and he's one of these hunters. But unlike the legendary figures whose exploits dominated the news and inspired awe, my story is not one of triumph or greatness. He, by all accounts, a failure. Born quirkless in a world where supernatural abilities are as ubiquitous as the air we breathe, he was branded an outcast from the start. His lack of power relegated me to the lowest rung of the hunter hierarchy, an E rank, the weakest of the weak, barely surviving the most basic of dungeon expeditions. The scars of his childhood followed me into adulthood, etched deeper by the cruel nickname Deku, a taunt that clung to me like a parasite. In Korea, where my work as a hunter took him, the people bestowed upon me an even harsher title, the weakest hunter of all mankind. It was a moniker that felt like a brand, a constant reminder of his failures, inadequacies, and the yawning chasm between Izuku and the heroes he once idolized. Life as the weakest hunter is a relentless struggle. Each step into a dungeon feels like a tightrope over a pit of snarling beasts. Every encounter with a monster is a gamble, the odds stacked against me in a cruel game of survival. The weight of his insignificance crushes me, yet he presses on, driven by a fragile hope that one day, against all odds, he might prove myself worthy of the title hunter. Then came the day that shattered the fragile equilibrium of my existence. What should have been a routine mission, a straightforward clear of a D-rank dungeon, descended into a waking nightmare. The air grew dense and oppressive as Izuku ventured deeper, each breath thick and syrupy, as if the dungeon sought to suffocate me. A primal dread coiled in his gut as the truth dawned on him. Izuku had stumbled into a double dungeon, a deadly anomaly where two dungeons merged into a single, lethal labyrinth. Even seasoned hunters feared such places. For someone like him, it was a death sentence. The monsters came in waves, their glowing eyes brimming with a hunger that chilled me to the bone. Their claws gleamed like razors under the dim, otherworldly light, and their guttural snarls promised a swift and merciless end. Izuku fought with everything he had, my body a blur of desperate motion, his cheap sort of pitiful weapon against their armored hides. My muscles burned, and my lungs screamed for air, but it was futile. Overwhelmed and outmatched, he fell. The cold stone floor of the dungeon embraced me as my strength gave out. Izuku's vision blurred, the world around me fading into a haze of shadows and snarls. Izuku braced myself for the inevitable, for the cold embrace of death. But as the darkness closed in, an eerie silence descended, replacing the cacophony of monsters with an almost serene stillness. Fate, however, had other plans. When he awoke, the sterile scent of disinfectant filled my nostrils, and the rhythmic beeping of medical equipment greeted his ears. The stark white ceiling above him told me he was in a hospital. Somehow, inexplicably, Izuku had survived. His mind swirled with confusion and disbelief, but the surprises didn't end there. As his vision cleared, something impossible hovered before me, a translucent screen, glowing faintly in the air, visible only to Izuku. It was like a scene ripped straight from an RPG, complete with stats, quests, and a leveling system. The soft blue light bathed the room in an ethereal glow, and his heart raced with a mix of fear and wonder. This newfound ability, this mesmerizing game-like interface, held the promise to rewrite his destiny. It wasn't just a tool, it was a doorway to transformation. Each quest presented the thrilling prospect of hunting fearsome monsters, growing stronger with every hard-fought victory, and leveling up in ways he had only dared to dream of. For the first time since he had taken up the mantle of a hunter, a spark of exhilaration ignited within Izuku. It was more than hope, it was a glimmering possibility that Izuku could transcend the humiliating title of the weakest hunter of all mankind. As he lay on the cold floor, staring up at the glowing screen, his thoughts spiraled with endless possibilities. The road ahead would undoubtedly be grueling, riddled with peril at every turn. But for the first time in Izuku's life, Izuku felt a genuine sense of purpose. This was the beginning of his real story. Not as a helpless, overlooked E-rank hunter, but as someone who could evolve, adapt, and rise beyond their limitations. The potential to grow stronger coursed through his veins, and it filled Izuku with a determination he had never known. With trembling fingers, Izuku reached out toward the radiant, floating screen its soft, otherworldly glow casting shadows on my face. The interface responded instantly to my touch, emitting a melodic chime that resonated deep in his chest. A new quest materialized before me, its words brimming with challenge and promise. Izuku's heart pounded as he took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. He was ready to confront the trials no matter how daunting they were. The weakest hunter was about to embark on a journey to defy all odds, to claim a destiny that no one believed possible. His path to becoming the strongest was about to begin. 10 years later, Seoul, Korea. The cityscape of Seoul was different, a testament to the resilience of mankind in the wake of threats from outside. The skyscrapers glinted with a sheen, their highly polished surfaces rippling occasionally with the shine of a closing gate. Hyper-advanced subway trains thunder beneath the busy streets, their tracks carefully mapped around known dungeon hotspots. But there were still pockets of tradition. Amidst all this futuristic setting, ancient Buddhist temples and magnificent palaces stood as mute sentinels, their ageless architecture a jarring contrast to the neon streets and holographic advertisement boards. The atmosphere throbbed with an electric charge, a blend of excitement and trepidation which had become so common in this new world. Seoul was now not just a capital city, but had transformed into a center of hunters from across the globe. Dongdaemun Design Plaza, which had initially been a fashion and art center, had been usurped as a high-tech hunter complex. Its shiny metallic exterior now housed training facilities, labs, and a command center for coordinating dungeon raids. Behind Gyeongbokgung Palace loomed a new structure, the Hunters Association headquarters. Its contemporary appearance somehow complemented the traditional appearance, a physical representation of how old and new coexisted in this new world. By night, the city was a different place. The streets around Jogisa Temple, usually serene, were now crowded with hunters preparing for evening raids. Equipment shops stayed late, their windows lighting up with lines of the latest armor and weapons designed to combat supernatural horrors. Seoul evolved, grew, and became a bulwark against the turbulent forces that menaced humanity. It was a city of contrasts, where the weight of history met the uncertain future, and where common people coexisted with those who had extraordinary abilities. In this new Seoul, the stage was set for the next chapter in the story of the world's weakest hunter, Izuku Midoriya. Scene change. Izuku POV, age 24. Seoul's streets pulsed with energy as I pushed through the chaotic morning frenzy. The air was an intoxicating mix of popping street food and the faint metallic scent that seemed to linger in the air after a gate had recently closed. At the crowded intersection, that same twinge of inadequacy annoyed me once again. Being a hunter came with its advantages: a muted boost in power, faster healing, but pitted against the titans, I was a poor imitation of what a hunter was supposed to be. My hand drifted down toward the scar beneath my jacket sleeve, a silent reminder as ghostly as the figure of how many times I'd narrowly avoided dying. Too many close calls, too many disappointments. Some hunter, I muttered to myself, swerving around a suited businessman who didn't even glance my way. To him, I was just a face in the crowd of commuters. If he had any idea the burden I carried. The green glow illuminated, and the crowd surged forward. Each step was heavier than the previous one, weighed down by responsibilities I couldn't escape. Mom's persistent medical bills, rent rising higher by the month, and Izumi's dreams of college all fell on me alone. And it was all funded by the leftovers an E-rank hunter could scrounge together. I caught sight of myself through the window of a store I passed. The image staring back at me was more than 24, my circles of concern revealing the long nights of being perched at the edge of exhaustion. There remained, deep down below all that weariness, still an ember of drive. I'm not doing this because I want, I muttered, clenching my fists as if to anchor myself. The words tasted bitter, like a lifeline, a mantra I'd spoken 1,000 times. I'm doing it because I have to, because there's no other choice. A sharp ring on my cell cut through my reverie. Another job, this one in a construction building. My heart raced, the usual combination of dread and adrenaline coursing through my body. Another dungeon, another fight for survival, another chance to fail or muddle through another day. I set my shoulders and drove away doubts, putting on a forced smile on my lips. Hell awaited, but I was in no way allowed to halt. Time skip, soul-building sight. Cobalt color danced around the location, thickening into an energetic portal that glowed with the otherworldly vibration. Seated next to the portal, laborers and adventurers hastily loaded up gear in preparation to ride off towards the impending raid at the gate. Among the crowd stood a pale-skinned man in his early 60s. His short, smoke-gray locks and stubbled jaw gave him a tough but calm look. His narrow slate-blue eyes were staring intensely at the portal. Of middling height and wiry build, he stood with quiet confidence. He blended function and a dash of subtle fashion in an electric blue bomber over a crisp white collared long sleeve and sleekly pressed gray slacks. Standing next to a food truck, he seemed at the same time apart from the drama and profoundly engaged in the playing out drama. The truck's operator handed him a cup of steaming hot coffee. "Good luck during the raid today," said the attendant with a smile. "Thanks," replied the man, drinking it. "Hey, Kim," somebody yelled out. Sangshik Kim spun around upon hearing his name being called out. Through the crowd of people was someone he recognized, frantically waving to make him see her. Part-1 Shik was the man, a fairly pale, paunchy man in his mid-40s with cocoa-brown eyes and jet black hair styled in a curly mullet with sideburns. A green sweater over a black tee, and the lower half of his clothing was track pants with sneakers. "Long time no see," Park replied, smiling. "Wait, Park, what in the world are you doing here?" Kim asked in surprise. Park was another D-rank friend. As they shook hands, Kim teased, "I thought you swore you'd never be a hunter again." Park chuckled. "Well, my wife's having her second child. Need to make some quick money, you know what I mean? Aren't, like, raid for fast money?" Kim shot back. Park covered his face and massaged his temples. "I'm just anxious. It's been so long. I might have fallen behind. My abilities weren't very good to begin with, but now..." "Yikes." Kim half laughed mockingly, though, and was quickly distracted by someone behind Park. A group of workers greeted the guest warmly. "Hey, Midoriya, you made it. Thanks for coming. It's snowing out or something." "No problem at all," Izuku replied with a polite smile. "I'm here to help in any way that I can." Izuku had an oval face with smooth, pale-complexioned skin, though bandages covering his cheeks concealed his freckles. His medium-length black hair, which shone blue when the sun hit it, set around his wide, denim-blue eyes. He was tall and thin and dressed in a blue hooded jacket, jeans, and an emerald green backpack. "Hello, Midoriya. You've arrived? Have you eaten anything?" Kim waved to him, smiling warmly. "Yes, Mr. Kim. Thank you for taking me in," replied Izuku with a bow, departing. While observing the young man, Park looked towards Kim and asked inquiringly, "The man over there, does he seem to matter? Is he strong? Everybody looks happy to see him." Kim smiled softly at the question. "You left and came back, so you wouldn't know him. His nickname is the world's weakest hunter." Park raised an eyebrow in confusion. "Weakest hunter? Not the strongest hunter?" he asked, confused. Kim nodded softly with a small laugh. "Yeah, the strongest hunter would be an S-rank hunter. But him? He's the weakest of them all. Is he that weak?" Park prodded again, his voice tinged with incredulity. "I mean, he's that weak that he gets injured even in E-rank dungeons." "Seriously, he's likely the weakest hunter in the area," Kim shrugged. "So he's really that weak?" Park exaggerated the question, his voice tinged with skepticism. Kim laughed and continued, "Well, if he's here, then it probably means our dungeon will be quite easy to handle." "Oh," Park outlined, allowing realization to set in. "Hi, let's quit before he catches us." "Hee hee," Kim whispered, looking in the direction of Park. At the same time, Park turned his eyes to the young man. Izuku groaned, saying to himself, "I've already heard everything, you pesky geezers." "Hee hee." Izuku approached the food truck, his legs heavy with exhaustion. The aroma of freshly ground coffee wafted through the air, beckoning his senses. He could manage a weak smile as he addressed the attendant. "Hello, Can I get a cup of coffee, please? The attendant's face fell, honest regret in his eyes. Ah, Hunter Midoriya. I'm sorry, but we just finished our coffee. Izuku's shoulders slumped into an unconscious slump. To himself, he grumbled, now even coffee. Sucks, man. He turned away from the truck, and the world around him began to blur to a soft gray. The din of the construction site dropped to a dull rumble in his ears. His cheerful face failed faster than a flimsy flashlight, a testament to his exhaustion and his growing skepticism that coffee was not a placebo. I'm really sorry, Hunter Midoriya, the attendant shouted again, his tone laced with concern. Izuku attempted a smile. Nah, it's okay, he replied, waving away the apology even as his eyes betrayed his disappointment. Just when Izuku was about to drown in more sulking, a thunderous scream nearly knocked him off. His hair whipped around like a tempest windsock, and for a moment, his eyes glazed over and became empty as if his mind had momentarily disconnected to absorb the shock of the ruckus. Ah, Izuku, you got hurt again. Shaking his head to clear away the ringing from his ears, Izuku met the familiar voice. Oh, hello, he said back, voice mixed between surprise and resignation. It seems like you're thinking about participating in this raid, too, Juhi. Lee Juhi, who was a short, pale woman with striking sky-blue eyes, came running to him. Her bright orange hair, cut short to shoulder length, bobbed up and down as she rushed. She had on a plain brown fur coat that dramatically set off her black stilettos. She looked a little prepared for any potential dungeon raid. When she came to Izuku, Juhi's eyes opened wide with worry. Of course, I'm here, but what's going on with your face? Her eyes swept across the bandages on his cheeks. Did you get injured again? Izuku's hand instinctively extended to touch the bandages, and his face turned red with embarrassment. Dunno. It just happened, I guess. He fibbed, evading Juhi's scolding glance. Izuku squirmed under Juhi's piercing stare, his eyes scanning wildly for words. Nothing, he stammered out, his voice cracking ever so slightly. The fabrication floated between them. Juhi's eyes narrowed, incredulous. She was about to make her point when the commotion around the gate interrupted them. Workers were scrambling to take up their posts, and other hunters were preparing equipment. Hey, look, Izuku cut in quickly, jumping on the opportunity to distract from the subject. We need to prepare, too. He nodded toward a stack of crates in the distance. Let's sit there and talk a bit before it begins. Juhi hesitated before nodding reluctantly. They went over to the crates and sat down, the wooden slats groaning a little under them. All right, Juhi answered, softening. Tell me what really happened. Did you have to be hospitalized? Izuku let out a disappointed sigh, his shoulders slumping. Yeah, it was just an E-rank dungeon, but for some reason, I was the only one who got hurt. He laughed at self-deprecation. Pretty pathetic, huh? Juhi's forehead creased with concern. How did that even happen? Were there other hunters around you? There were, Izuku continued, mindlessly pulling at a loose thread on his jacket, but didn't even see fit to bring a healer. Told them they had enough rank that they didn't need to what? Juhi's voice was one of indignation. That's outrageous. Even if they are higher ranked, no reason to be so cavalier. What if something had gone very wrong? Izuku shrugged, a wretched smile crossing his lips. It's okay. It's just because I'm weak. I'm accustomed to it by now. You get that, don't you? Juhi's mouth was open in protest, but Izuku halted her gently. Look, everyone's getting ready. We should actually go join them. He pushed up from his seated position, wiping down his pants. Juhi also got up, a mix of frustration and concern etched on her face. Yeah, I suppose we should, she mumbled reluctantly. Scene change. The crew amassed at the sparkling gate, eagerness filling the frigid morning air. The building site was abuzz with energy as they prepared to strike. Everyone, a loud voice rang out, shattering conversation. All eyes fell on a lean man with slicked-back auburn hair, his forehead furrowed with deep lines that spoke of years of experience. He wore a simple blue tracksuit, a stark difference from the other hunters' bulky gear. Kim's eyes grew wide with admiration. Mr. Song, you're the highest rank in this party. I'm all for it, he joked, his tone commanding respect. Park nodded enthusiastically, a grin spreading on his face. Well, since Mr. Song is coming on board, I will too. It will be intriguing to see the capabilities of Mr. Kim. The other employees grumbled in agreement, eagerly anticipating following their favored raid leader. Izuku stepped forward, his voice smooth compared to the quivering exhilaration coursing through him. Take care of us, Mr. Song Chi-Yul. Beside him, Juhi had offered a hesitating smile of encouragement. The eyes of Chi-Yul skimmed over the group, reaching a snap judgment of preparedness. Contented with what he saw, he bellowed one final time. All right, then let's enter the dungeon. Let's go. The workers hurried ahead, their excitement infectious as they headed towards the gate. Kim glanced back, his eyes landing on Izuku. A mix of concern and amusement colored his voice as he yelled, Midoriya, don't get injured behind, okay? Izuku stifled a chuckle, trying to hide the pain of the reminder of his reputation. Okay, he said, his voice light despite the weight in his chest. Come on, Izuku, Juhi shouted out, her enthusiasm breaking through his darkened mood. She entered the gate, and the atmosphere around her figure. Izuku slowed down, inhaled deeply, and steadied himself. Okay, he muttered under his breath, but not loudly enough for anyone other than himself to hear. Arriving at the gate last, he leaned against a fresh surge of determination. I'm going to do my best today, he decided, pushing his shoulders back as the energy from the gate washed over him. With one last glance at the world behind him, Izuku entered the portal, the familiar hum of interdimensional travel making his spine tingle. As the building's site faded from view, to be replaced by the unknown dangers of the dungeon, Izuku couldn't help but wonder what awaited them on the other side. Despite his anxieties and others' misgivings, a small part of him dared to dream that today would be different, that today he would at last be worthy to be a hunter. In a world where the fabric of reality had unraveled, humanity was staring into the abyss of the impossible. Interdimensional portals, shimmering and alive with otherworldly energy, began to puncture the skies and landscapes of our planet. We called them gates, luminous thresholds that pulsed like the heartbeat of some alien force, tearing through the seams of existence. Beyond these portals lay realms we named dungeons, nightmarish domains crawling with monstrous entities that defied logic and haunted the deepest recesses of our minds. As the world reeled from this cosmic upheaval, a new kind of savior emerged amidst the chaos. They were the hunters, who had awakened to extraordinary powers, their abilities as varied and unpredictable as the dungeons. These brave souls ventured into the gates, risking their lives to shield humanity from the horrors lurking within those shadowed realms. A man named Izuku Midoriya, and he's one of these hunters. But unlike the legendary figures whose exploits dominated the news and inspired awe, my story is not one of triumph or greatness. He, by all accounts, a failure. Born quirkless in a world where supernatural abilities are as ubiquitous as the air we breathe, he was immediately branded an outcast. His lack of power relegated me to the lowest rung of the hunter hierarchy, an E rank, the weakest of the weak, barely surviving the most basic of dungeon expeditions. The scars of childhood followed me into adulthood, etched deeper by the cruel nickname Deku, a taunt that clung to me like a parasite. In Korea, where my work as a hunter took him, the people bestowed upon me an even harsher title, the weakest hunter of all mankind. It was a moniker that felt like a brand, a constant reminder of his failures, inadequacies, and the yawning chasm between Izuku and the heroes he once idolized. Life as the weakest hunter is a relentless struggle. Each step into a dungeon feels like a tightrope over a pit of snarling beasts. Every encounter with a monster is a gamble, the odds stacked against me in a cruel game of survival. The weight of his insignificance crushes me, yet he presses on, driven by a fragile hope that one day, against all odds, he might prove myself worthy of the title hunter. Then came the day that shattered the fragile equilibrium of my existence. What should have been a routine mission, a straightforward clear of 8D rank dungeon, descended into a waking nightmare. The air grew dense and oppressive as Izuku ventured deeper, each breath thick and syrupy, as if the dungeon sought to suffocate me. A primal dread coiled in his gut as the truth dawned on him. Izuku had stumbled into a double dungeon, a deadly anomaly where two dungeons merged into a single, lethal labyrinth. Even seasoned hunters feared such places. For someone like him, it was a death sentence. The monsters came in waves, their glowing eyes brimming with a hunger that chilled me to the bone. Their claws gleamed like razors under the dim, otherworldly light, and their guttural snarls promised a swift and merciless end. Izuku fought with everything he had, my body a blur of desperate motion, his cheap sword a pitiful weapon against their armored hides. My muscles burned and my lungs screamed for air, but it was futile. Overwhelmed and outmatched, he fell. The cold stone floor of the dungeon embraced me as my strength gave out. Izuku's vision blurred, the world around me fading into a haze of shadows and snarls. Izuku braced myself for the inevitable, for the cold embrace of death. But as the darkness closed in, an eerie silence descended, replacing the cacophony of monsters with an almost serene stillness. Fate, however, had other plans. When he awoke, the sterile scent of disinfectant filled my nostrils, and the rhythmic beeping of medical equipment greeted his ears. The stark white ceiling above him told me he was in a hospital. Somehow, inexplicably, Izuku had survived. His mind swirled with confusion and disbelief, but the surprises didn't. In there, as his vision cleared, something impossible hovered before me, a translucent screen, glowing faintly in the air, visible only to Izuku. It was like a scene ripped straight from an RPG, complete with stats, quests, and a leveling system. The soft blue light bathed the room in an ethereal glow, and his heart raced with a mix of fear and wonder. This newfound ability, this mesmerizing game-like interface, held the promise to rewrite his destiny. It wasn't just a tool, it was a doorway to transformation. Each quest presented the thrilling prospect of hunting fearsome monsters, growing stronger with every hard-fought victory, and leveling up in ways he had only dared to dream of. For the first time since he had taken up the mantle of a hunter, a spark of exhilaration ignited within Izuku. It was more than hope, it was a glimmering possibility that Izuku could transcend the humiliating title of the weakest hunter of all mankind. As he lay on the cold floor, staring up at the glowing screen, his thoughts spiraled with endless possibilities. The road ahead would undoubtedly be grueling, riddled with peril at every turn. But for the first time in Izuku's life, Izuku felt a genuine sense of purpose. This was the beginning of his real story. Not as a helpless, overlooked E-rank hunter, but as someone who could evolve, adapt, and rise beyond their limitations. The potential to grow stronger coursed through his veins, and it filled Izuku with a determination he had never known. With trembling fingers, Izuku reached out toward the radiant, floating screen, its soft, otherworldly glow casting shadows on my face. The interface responded instantly to my touch, emitting a melodic chime that resonated deep in his chest. A new quest materialized before me, its words brimming with challenge and promise. Izuku's heart pounded as he took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. He was ready to confront the trials no matter how daunting they were. The weakest hunter was about to embark on a journey to defy all odds, to claim a destiny that no one believed possible. His path to becoming the strongest was about to begin. Outside the gate, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the construction site. 3 workers stood near the shimmering portal, their faces etched with relief and concern. They had just finished their final checks on the gate, eager to call it a day. "All right, that's the last of them. Let's get out of here," the first worker called out, wiping sweat from his brow. "Yeah, all right," his colleague nodded, already gathering his tools. The third worker, however, seemed lost in thought. His gaze was fixed on the spot where Hunter Midoriya had disappeared into the gate. His companions noticed his hesitation. "What are you thinking about?" The second worker asked, curiosity coloring his voice. The third worker, who they recognized as the attendant from the nearby food truck, sighed heavily. "It's just that I feel bad for sending Hunter Midoriya in there like that. I mean, I couldn't even offer him a cup of coffee before he went in." The first worker scoffed. "It's only the weakest of all E ranks. What's the big deal? What's the dungeon rank this time anyway?" "This time it's around D rank," the attendant replied, his voice tinged with worry. "It's just, I've never seen Hunter Izuku Midoriya come out of a job for the Hunters Association without getting hurt. Even for a D-rank dungeon, I can't help but worry." The second worker placed a reassuring hand on the attendant's shoulder. "Hey, if it's a D-rank dungeon, he should be fine, right? The guy's been doing this for a while now. Maybe this time will be different." The attendant nodded, though the concern didn't leave his eyes. He cast one last glance at the shimmering gate before turning away. "Yeah, maybe you're right. Let's go." As they walked away from the site, the attendant couldn't shake the image of Midoriya's determined yet towards from his mind. He silently hoped that this mission would indeed be different, that perhaps this time, the young hunter would emerge unscathed and victorious. Inside the dungeon, the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something more sinister. Izuku winced as Juhi held a softly glowing yellowish-green orb over his latest injury, its healing energy seeping into his battered body. "Why do you insist on staying in this hunter business, Izuku?" Juhi's voice was laced with concern, her blue eyes fixed on him. "You'll get yourself into serious danger if you keep this up." Izuku opened his mouth to apologize, but Juhi cut him off. "I'm not asking for your apology. I'm just worried for you, that's all." Her fingers tightened around the healing orb, its light pulsing in time with her agitation. Around them, the sounds of battle echoed through the cavernous space. Their fellow hunters were engaged in fierce combat with various magical beasts, their shouts and the creatures' roars creating a cacophony of noise. Izuku's gaze darted between Juhi and the ongoing fight, his body tense with the desire to help despite his injuries. "At least this raid is almost over now." Juhi sighed, her shoulders relaxing slightly as she observed the tide of battle turning in their favor. Izuku nodded, his eyes scanning the battlefield. He watched as Song Chi-yo, the raid leader, delivered a finishing blow to a particularly nasty beast, its massive form crumpling to the ground with a resounding thud. Sang-shik Kim and Park Byum-shik were working in tandem, their movements fluid and practiced as they dispatched the remaining creatures. As the last beast fell, a triumphant cheer erupted from the group. The hunters clapped each other on the back, their faces a blend of exhaustion and exhilaration. The cavern, once filled with the sounds of battle, now echoed with relieved laughter and excited chatter. Juhi turned to Izuku, her blue eyes searching his face. "Izuku," she hesitated, her voice soft but tinged with worry. "Is there a reason why you can't quit this hunter job?" Izuku's lips curved into a grin, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm just doing this for fun," he lied, his tone light. "I'd probably die of boredom if I quit." Juhi frowned, clearly not buying his excuse. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I'm embarrassed to ask, but why are you really doing this?" She paused, then added with a smirk, trying to lighten the mood. "At this rate, it looks like you'll die one way or another." Izuku burst into laughter, the sound echoing off the cavern walls. "Don't laugh," Juhi scolded, crossing her arms. "You'll reopen your wounds." "Sorry," Izuku said, still chuckling as he tried to stifle his amusement. His hand unconsciously moved to his side, where the healing orb had done its work. As their laughter subsided, Song's voice cut through the cavern. He was addressing the group, his tone authoritative yet excited. "All right, everyone gather round. Let's talk about our spoils." The hunters huddled closer, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. Song held up a small, white diamond-like object between his thumb and forefinger. "These," he said, "are essence stones. They're what we can collect by defeating monsters in the dungeon." He paused, letting the information sink in. Now, the value of these stones depends on two things: the quality and the ranking of the monster, or the hunter who killed it. A murmur of interest rippled through the group. Song continued, high-ranked stones? They're worth millions of dollars. Izuku looked down at the stone in his hand. It was small, barely the size of his pinky nail, and seemed to pulse with a faint, underwhelming light. He sighed internally. All I get for getting my butt kicked like this is an E-rank monster stone? He thought, turning the pitiful reward over in his palm. It's such a meager reward. Just as the group began to disperse, a shout rang out, echoing through the cavern. Hey, look, everyone! There's another entrance here. All heads turned toward the source of the voice. Near the far wall of the cavern, partially hidden behind a jutting rock formation, was a dark opening. It seemed to beckon to them, promising more challenges and potentially greater rewards. Song approached the cave, his eyes narrowing as he studied the dark opening. A double dungeon, he muttered, a mix of excitement and caution in his voice. I've heard rumors, but I never thought I'd actually encounter one. With a practiced flick of his wrist, a fireball materialized in his right hand, its warm glow casting dancing shadows across his face. He hurled it forward, the flaming orb illuminating the depths of the cave as it arced through the air. The flickering light revealed a world of jagged walls and looming shadows. Stalactites hung from the ceiling like nature's chandeliers, their crystalline surfaces glinting in the firelight. The air grew noticeably cooler as it wafted from the cave's entrance, carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth and something otherworldly. Everyone gather around, Song called out, his voice echoing off the cavern walls. The group huddled closer, their faces a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Song's expression was serious as he began to explain, the gate's still open, which means we haven't faced the boss yet. It's likely waiting for us beyond this new entrance. He paused, letting the information sink in. We've got two options here. We can play it safe and wait for reinforcements, or we can push ahead, take the risk, and try to defeat the boss ourselves. His gaze swept over the assembled hunters, reading their reactions. Some looked eager for the challenge, while others shifted uncomfortably. I know it's a big decision, Song continued, so let's put it to a vote. Who's in favor of pressing on? After a moment of tense silence, hands began to rise. Park and Kim were among the first, their expressions determined. About half the group followed suit, their raised hands a testament to their courage, or perhaps their desperation for greater rewards. The other half, however, remained still. Their faces were etched with uncertainty, eyes darting between the ominous cave entrance and their more daring companions. Jui, her blue eyes clouded with worry, spoke up softly. I'm sorry, but I'd rather not. Her voice carried a tremor of unease. We've already been through so much. Pushing our luck feels dangerous. Kim glanced around, taking stock of the divided group. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Well, looks like we got ourselves a tie. Half for yes, half for no. His eyes landed on Izuku, who had yet to cast his vote. How about you, Midoriya? Looks like you're our tiebreaker. All eyes turned to Izuku. He felt the weight of their gazes, the pressure of the decision resting squarely on his shoulders. His hand clenched around the small essence stone in his pocket, its meager presence a stark reminder of his desperate situation. Thoughts raced through Izuku's mind, a whirlwind of responsibilities and needs. I don't have enough money saved up, he reminded himself, the constant worry gnawing at him. My sister's college tuition is due soon, and Mom's still in the hospital. The image of his mother, lying pale and weak in her hospital bed, flashed before his eyes. Her smile was still warm despite her pain, urging him to take care of himself. Izuku's heart raced, torn between self-preservation and the crushing weight of his family's needs. He looked at the worried face of Juhi, then at the expectant expressions of Park and Kim. Finally, his gaze settled on the dark maw of the cave, both threatening and promising. Taking a deep breath, Izuku steeled himself. His voice, stronger than he felt, rang out in the cavern. Yes, I'll go with you. The words hung in the air, sealing their fate. Some of his companions nodded approvingly, while others exchanged concerned glances. As the group began to prepare for their descent into the unknown, Izuku couldn't shake the feeling that this decision would change everything. For better or worse, he was about to find out. After all, it's all or nothing. 40 minutes later, they had been walking for what felt like an eternity, their footsteps echoing in the eerie silence of the cavern. The air was thick with tension, heavy and oppressive, as if the very walls were closing in on them. Izuku could feel the weight of his decision pressing down on him with each step, his chest tight with anxiety. He glanced at Juhi, her vibrant orange hair a stark contrast against the dim, shadowy surroundings, like a flame flickering in the darkness. I'm sorry." Izuku finally broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. He scratched the back of his head nervously, reminiscent of a child caught in the act of mischief. His dark blue eyes darted around, unable to meet Juhi's gaze directly. Juhi, maintaining a facade of calm, raised an eyebrow and responded with a deceptively even tone. "What for?" Izuku's eyes continued to dance around, avoiding direct contact with Juhi's piercing gaze. "Because my vote forced you to come here against your will," he admitted, his words heavy with regret. The guilt gnawed at him, a constant reminder of the potential danger he had put his companions in. Juhi's face remained impassive, a mask of indifference that could rival the best poker players. She stared straight ahead, her expression as unreadable as a locked diary with no key. "I'm fine, so there's no need for you to worry," she stated flatly, her voice echoing off the damp cavern walls. "Are you sure?" Izuku pressed, his voice quivering slightly. As soon as the words left his mouth, he realized his mistake. The atmosphere shifted palpably, like the calm before a storm. Juhi's orange hair seemed to cast a more menacing shadow across her face, and a tick mark appeared on her forehead, pulsing with barely contained irritation. Slowly, as if time itself had slowed down, she turned her head towards him. A red aura, almost visible in its intensity, flared behind her. Her eyes, once warm and friendly, went blank, outlined with an electric red glow that spoke volumes of the fury brewing within. "Am I sure?" she repeated, her voice dropping to a low, ominous tone that sent chills down Izuku's spine. It was the kind of voice that precedes catastrophic events, the calm before a volcano erupts. Izuku, feeling the suffocating pressure of her aura, paled instantly. His survival instincts kicked in, and he took a cautious step back, his eyes wide with growing alarm. The cavern suddenly felt much smaller, as if the very rocks were closing in around him. "Are you crazy?" Juhi exploded, her calm facade shattering like glass. "If that monster had stabbed you any higher, you wouldn't just have a hole in your chest, you'd have a skylight. And don't even get me started on your limbs." She flailed her arms wildly, her movements exaggerated by her frustration. The sound of her voice bounced off the cavern walls, amplifying her anger. "Do you know how much energy I had to use to patch you up?" But Juhi was far from finished. Her eyes, still blank with rage, remained locked on Izuku. Her teeth seemed to sharpen comically into fangs, adding to her fearsome appearance. The red aura behind her intensified, morphing into what looked like actual flames. "How could you?" she roared, her voice echoing off the cavern walls, loud enough to potentially alert any nearby monsters. Izuku gulped audibly, sweat pouring down his face in rivulets. "I voted to continue this dungeon," he mumbled under his breath, more to himself than to Juhi. "I didn't know I signed up for a horror movie." His eyes darted around, searching for an escape route, though he knew outrunning Juhi in this enclosed space was impossible. The shadows seemed to dance mockingly around him, offering no sanctuary. "What's gotten into you? Did you hurt your head too?" "Huh." Juhi continued her tirade, her words sharp with worry disguised as anger. Her voice reverberated through the cavern, each word hitting Izuku like a physical blow. As Juhi's lecture washed over him, Izuku found himself staring into space, his mind wandering. The dim light of the cavern seemed to fade away as he lost himself in thought. I guess the only reason I'm standing here is because Juhi is a B rank healer. He realized a wave of gratitude washing over him. I owe her so much. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks, snapping him back to the present. He turned to face Juhi, who was still mid-rant, her face flushed with emotion. Juhi, he interrupted softly, his voice filled with sincerity. Thank you. I mean it. Without you, I wouldn't be here. I'm sorry for worrying you, and I promise to be more careful. Juhi's anger seemed to deflate at his words, and her fiery aura dimmed. She sighed deeply, her shoulders sagging, the fight leaving her body. Just don't do it again, okay? She muttered, her voice now tinged with exhaustion rather than anger. Izuku nodded in response, relief washing over him. The tension in the air began to dissipate, like a storm cloud finally breaking. Well, to make it up to me, how about you buy me dinner? Juhi suggested, a hint of playfulness returning to her voice. The sudden shift in her demeanor caught Izuku off guard. Izuku blushed, his cheeks turning a shade of red that rivaled Juhi's earlier aura. I don't have much money, he thought to himself, panic rising in his chest. The weight of his financial troubles seemed to press down on him once more. Noticing Izuku's silence, Juhi's expression changed. She pouted, her lower lip jutting out slightly. What? You're not interested in buying me dinner? She asked, her tone a mix of disappointment and teasing. Izuku's eyes widened as he realized how his silence might be interpreted. No, of course, I do, he replied hastily, waving his hands in front of him. I'd love to. I mean, I'd be happy to buy you dinner. It's the least I can do after everything you've done for me. A small smile tugged at the corners of Juhi's lips, softening her features. Good, she said, nodding in satisfaction. We found the boss lair. A voice echoed through the cavern, startling Izuku and Juhi from their conversation. The entire group rushed forward, converging at a set of massive double doors that loomed before them. The doors were unlike anything they had ever seen in a dungeon before. Towering at least 15 feet high, they were made of a dark, polished material that seemed to absorb the light around them. Intricate carvings covered the surface, depicting scenes of battle and conquest that seemed to shift and move when viewed from different angles. Park stepped forward, his hand hovering just above the door's surface. I've never seen a lair with doors like this before, he muttered, his brow furrowed in concentration. This is all new, but something doesn't seem right. The air around the doors felt heavy, charged with an energy that made the hairs on the back of Izuku's neck stand on end. He could sense a power emanating from beyond, something ancient and formidable. Kim moved closer, his eyes scanning the intricate designs. Are you sure this isn't dangerous? He asked, his voice tinged with apprehension. These symbols, I can't make them out, but they give me a bad feeling. Park withdrew his hand, a troubled expression crossing his face. I'm far from sure, he admitted, his usual confidence wavering. This is beyond anything we've encountered before. The energy signature is off the charts. Song straightened his back, his weathered face set with determination. His eyes, sharp despite his age, scanned the faces of his companions. Why go back empty-handed now? He asked, his voice carrying the weight of experience. We might be the first ones to discover this dungeon. It could be our chance at something extraordinary. He paused, letting his words sink in. But if you'd rather turn back, suit yourselves. I'm pressing on, even if I have to go alone. With that, Song strode purposefully towards the imposing double doors. His gait was steady, betraying none of the fatigue that must have been weighing on him after their long journey. A murmur rippled through the group. One of the younger hunters, his face etched with a mix of awe and uncertainty, whispered to his companion, I can see why Song Chiui has made a name for himself. He's one of the most decorated C rankers for offensive magic. His friend nodded, eyes fixed on Song's retreating figure. True, he replied in a hushed tone. If he weren't pushing well over 60, he'd be working with a major guild somewhere. We've been following him for a while now. Maybe we should trust his judgment. The group watched with bated breath as Song reached the doors. He placed his hands on the worn surface, his fingers tracing the intricate patterns carved into the ancient wood. With a deep breath, he pushed. To everyone's surprise, the massive doors swung open with a meaningful creak, far more easily than their size would suggest. Song's eyebrows rose slightly. "It's opening more easily than I expected," he mused aloud, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Let's see what's inside." Fwoosh! Fwoosh! As if responding to their presence, two torches suddenly flared to life on either side of the doorway. Twin jets of blue flame erupted from the shadows, casting an eerie, flickering light across the chamber beyond. The dancing flames revealed a sight that made even the seasoned Song pause in wonder. Before they stood a temple, its architecture reminiscent of a Catholic church. Towering stone columns stretched toward a vaulted ceiling, their surfaces adorned with intricate carvings. Rows of weathered pews lined the central aisle, leading to an ornate altar at the far end of the chamber. Stained glass windows, somehow intact despite their subterranean location, filtered the torchlight into a kaleidoscope of muted colors. Song's lips curved into a small smile of appreciation. "Oh, the torches lit up automatically. Nice touch," he remarked, his tone casual despite the awe-inspiring sight before them. He took a tentative step forward, his boots echoing on the stone floor. "I've never seen a dungeon like this before. Come on," he called back to the group, his voice tinged with excitement. "Spread out and check it out." As the group ventured deeper into the chamber, their eyes were drawn to the array of statues lining the walls. Knights, frozen mid-battle, stood with stone swords raised high. Nuns, caught in eternal performance, had their hands poised over silent instruments. The flickering torchlight danced across their faces, casting eerie shadows that seemed to breathe life into the cold stone. Izuku's attention was captured by a grand statue at the far end of the chamber. It depicted a high priest, or perhaps the father of the church, seated on an ornate chair. The statue loomed over everything else, its presence both commanding and unsettling. "This one's huge," Izuku remarked, his voice barely above a whisper. He tilted his head back, taking in the full height of the statue. The intricate details carved into the stone robes were impressive, and the stern expression on the priest's face made Izuku shiver slightly. Nearby, Song crouched by an unusual altar. It was a circular stone platform, its surface covered in strange symbols and lines forming a complex pattern. He leaned in closer, his weathered face scrunched in concentration. "What is this? Some kind of divination circle?" Song muttered, tracing one of the lines with a calloused finger. The stone felt unnaturally cool, and he sensed a faint, pulsing energy beneath his touch. Before Song could investigate further, a shout from one of the younger hunters pierced the silence. "Hey Song, there's writing over here. You need to see this." The group quickly gathered around a statue of a hooded angel. In its stone hands, it held a tablet covered in unfamiliar markings. Song squinted at the writing, his years of experience helping him decipher the ancient script. "Are these runes?" he whispered, leaning in closer, his breath fogging the cold air. His eyes widened as recognition dawned. "Let me see. It says, the commandments of the Kartinon Temple." The group fell into an uneasy silence as Song began to read aloud. His voice, steady yet heavy, reverberated through the chamber, amplifying the temple's oppressive atmosphere. "Thou shalt worship the god," he intoned, his words bouncing off the ancient stone walls like a chant from another time. "Thou shalt praise the god," Song continued, his tone deepening, each syllable laced with an unsettling gravity. As he read, Izuku felt a faint tug on his sleeve. Turning, he found Juhi standing behind him, her face ghostly pale, her trembling finger pointing toward the towering statue of the high priest. "Izuku," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "That statue, it moved. It's looking at us. It's staring." Izuku forced a shaky laugh, trying to dismiss her fear even as unease prickled at the back of his neck. "Come on, Juhi. It's probably just a trick of the light," he said, attempting to muster a reassuring smile. But the words felt hollow, even to him. The air had turned icy, the faint warmth of the torches now swallowed by an unnatural chill. "Thou shalt prove thy faith," Song's voice rang out, oblivious to the rising tension behind him. Jui gripped Izuku's arm tighter, her voice a terrified whisper. "No, I swear it moved again. Its eyes are following us." Izuku swallowed hard, his gaze darting to the statue. The flickering torchlight played tricks on its stone face, but for a fleeting moment, he could have sworn the hollow eyes shifted, locking onto him. A shiver raced down his spine. "It's just the shadows," he muttered, though his voice wavered. The chamber grew eerily quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your ears, thick and suffocating. Even the faint crackle of the torches seemed muted. Izuku's breath hitched. "Why does it feel so wrong in here?" he murmured, his eyes scanning the room. The shadows seemed alive, stretching unnaturally long, their edges writhing as if they had minds of their own. "Those who fail to obey these commandments." Song's voice faltered slightly, the weight of the words sinking in. He took a deep breath and finished. "Shall not be spared." The final sentence hung in the air like a death knell, and then the ground trembled. A deep, guttural rumble surged up from beneath them, vibrating through their bones like the growl of a slumbering beast. The torches flared violently, their flames twisting into grotesque shapes that clawed at the chamber walls. Shadows writhed and contorted, forming monstrous figures that seemed ready to step out of the darkness. Izuku instinctively moved closer to Juhi, his heart pounding as his gaze darted from one statue to the next. The once lifeless carvings now appeared disturbingly lifelike, their hollow eyes gleaming with malevolence. He could feel their stares, cold and unrelenting, boring into his very soul. And then silence. Heavy, oppressive, and absolute. Bam! The deafening crash shattered the stillness, echoing like a thunderclap. Dust rained down from the ceiling as the statues seemed to shudder, their features twisting ever so slightly in the flickering light. Everyone spun around, eyes wide with panic. The double doors, their only exit, had slammed shut. "What the hell?" Park shouted, his voice tinged with alarm. "The door just slammed shut. We're trapped," a blue-haired woman cried, her voice trembling with panic. She clutched at her chest, her breathing ragged. "What are we going to do?" Before anyone could answer, a burly man in a worn tracksuit shoved past her, his black hair disheveled and his brown eyes blazing with frustration. "I've had enough of this thing," he bellowed. "No more of this hocus-pocus nonsense. I told you we shouldn't have come here. This place is cursed." "Wait," Don Izuku started, but the man cut him off. "I'm done," he snapped, his voice echoing angrily. "You all can stay here and play with whatever freak show this is. Good luck. Or don't. I don't care." As he stormed toward the double doors, his heavy footsteps echoing in the eerie silence, Song's eyes widened in horror. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. "Wait. Don't touch the door," Song screamed, his voice cracking with urgency. But it was too late. KRK. A metallic screech tore through the air as the man froze mid-step. His gaze darted to his right, and his face twisted in shock. Emerging from the shadows, a rusted lance shot forward, its sharpened tip gleaming in the dim light. Shush! Splat! The lance tore through his neck with a sickening crunch, severing his head in one brutal, fluid motion. Vital fluid erupted in a violent spray, painting the door in a grotesque crimson arc. Thick rivulets dripped down like morbid rain, streaking the wooden surface as his lifeless body slumped against it. The corpse slid downward, leaving a smeared trail of red before collapsing into a twisted, unnatural heap on the cold stone floor. Beside the door, the once immobile stone knight shifted with eerie precision, its lance still slick with fresh vital fluid. For a moment, it seemed to savor the carnage, its hollow, unseeing eyes locked forward. Then, as if satisfied, it returned to its rigid stance, the weapon poised as though nothing had transpired. The room fell into a suffocating silence, broken only by the faint, rhythmic drip of vital fluid pooling beneath the fallen body. The air was thick and oppressive, as though the room itself was alive and watching. The unmoving stone knights lining the chamber loomed with an unsettling presence, their stillness somehow more menacing than movement. Shadows writhed in the flickering torchlight, stretching and twisting into grotesque shapes that seemed to mock the living. Every corner felt like a predator's lair, every shadow a lurking threat. The severed head rolled across the grimy floor, its dull thuds echoing in the silence. It stopped at the feet of the blue-haired woman, its lifeless eyes locked onto hers, frozen wide in an expression of unspeakable terror. Its slackened jaw hung open, caught mid-scream. For a heartbeat, she stood paralyzed, her breath caught in her throat. Then her scream tore through the air, raw and piercing, as she stumbled backward, her hands trembling violently. It moved. It actually moved. Someone from the group shrieked, their voice cracking under the weight of sheer panic. The shout ricocheted off the cold stone walls, amplifying the terror that clung to them like a suffocating fog. "What do we do?" Another voice cried, trembling and desperate. "How do we fight something like that? How?" The chamber seemed to close in on them, the flickering torchlight casting frantic, erratic shadows. The dark shapes on the walls twisted and writhed, taking on monstrous forms that seemed alive, mocking their helplessness. The air grew colder, heavier, as though the dungeon itself was feeding on their fear. Jui clung to Izuku's arm with a ferocity born of desperation, her nails digging into his skin like claws. Her face was pallid, her wide, tear-filled eyes radiating unspoken horror. Then, as if the weight of the moment became too much, she let out a scream, a sound so raw and primal it seemed to pierce the very fabric of the room. Izuku winced, both from the pain of her grip and the icy dread curling tighter around his chest. The guy who just died. He was D-rank, Izuku thought, his mind spiraling in frantic disbelief. Stronger than me, and I'm just E-rank. If he couldn't survive this, what chance do I have? His thoughts churned, a storm of panic and confusion. This can't be real. This can't be happening. 8D-ranked dungeon? How? How could something like this exist here? There shouldn't be anything this strong, anything this monstrous. His eyes darted frantically around the chamber, the towering statues seeming to press down on him with an oppressive weight. Once lifeless, their massive forms now exuded a sinister presence, their stone faces warped and grotesque in the unsteady glow of the torchlight. Shadows danced and twisted across the walls, playing cruel tricks on his mind, making the statues appear alive, breathing, watching, waiting. Wait, Song's voice, low and grim, cut through the oppressive silence, commanding everyone's attention. If these statues are moving, that means... He stopped abruptly, his unfinished sentence hanging in the air like a storm about to break. His gaze shifted to the stone-carved priest seated in the chair. "Ah, hell no," he muttered, his voice tinged with disbelief. "That thing can move too." Izuku felt a chill crawl up his spine, his blood freezing as Song fell silent. A memory surged to the forefront of his mind, Juhi's earlier warning. Her voice, trembling with fear, echoed in his ears as vividly as if she stood beside him again. "That statue, it moved. It's looking at us. It's staring." Izuku's stomach churned violently, a cold dread coiling tighter around his insides. Slowly, as if compelled by an unseen, malevolent force, his gaze drifted toward the towering figure of the high priest, his breath caught in his throat. Once an inert monolith of stone, the statue now radiated a sinister vitality. Its hollow, lifeless eyes had transformed into glowing, sickly yellow orbs that pulsed with an unnatural light. Worse still, they moved sweeping across the room with chilling, mechanical precision, like a predator methodically hunting its prey. And then, those dreadful eyes locked onto him. Izuku froze in terror, rooting him in place as his heart pounded furiously, each beat like the tolling of a death knell. The statue's gaze was suffocating, relentless, as if it were peeling back the layers of his being, exposing his deepest fears and vulnerabilities. He felt bare, his soul dissected under the weight of that unholy stare. His breaths came in shallow, panicked gasps, his chest tightening as the crushing reality of their situation consumed him. Song's ominous warning reverberated in his mind, each word laced with grim finality. Those who fail to obey these commandments shall not be spared. Clammy sweat slicked Izuku's skin as the walls seemed to close in around him, their once innocuous carvings now writhing as though alive. The air grew heavier, oppressive, and thick with a suffocating tension that made every second feel like an eternity. They were trapped, ensnared in a chamber where stone abominations stirred with purpose and where the largest, most malevolent of them had chosen him as its quarry. The glowing eyes flared brighter, their sickly hue casting grotesque shadows that danced across the walls. A deep, guttural rumble shook the chamber, the sound of stone grinding against stone reverberating like the growl of an ancient beast awakening from eternal slumber. The statue began to move, its massive form shifting with a deliberate, menacing purpose. The air seemed to hum with building energy, and Izuku's chest constricted as he realized what was coming. It was preparing to attack, to unleash a devastating beam that would obliterate everything in its path. The weight of impending doom pressed down on him like a vice. His lips trembled, parting as if to scream, but all he could manage was a faint, breathless whisper. "Oh no!" Flashback. Izuku's POV. "I've faced the brink of death more times than I can count. Even as a teenager, death seemed to shadow me relentlessly. Back then, I used to immerse myself in dark fantasy animes, captivated by its grim allure. But the idea of this job? In real life, it was terrifying, a concept I never believed could exist. That was until my family and I moved to Korea a year after All Might crushed my dreams, telling me I couldn't be a hero without a quirk. Not long after, I applied to become a hunter. My very first raid was a disaster. I got separated from the group and ended up stranded, completely vulnerable. E-rank beasts attacked me, leaving me battered and hospitalized for weeks. Another time, I nearly starved to death, trapped in a labyrinth with no way out. No matter how low-ranked the dungeon, it was always a fight for survival. Other hunters could afford decent gear, upgrading their weapons with the money they earned from selling essence stones. They grew stronger, hunting bigger beasts and reaping greater rewards. Meanwhile, all I could afford was a cheap knife. If it broke, I had no choice but to fight barehanded. Day after day, I endured. Years of mockery and ridicule hardened me, so I stopped caring what people in Korea thought of me. This life-threatening job came with its twisted perks, but survival demanded vigilance. I trained myself to spot opportunities, to notice the tiniest details others might miss. Perhaps of why I first felt the priest's cursed gaze. Eyes of granite burned, a sudden blaze, their light a dagger through the haze. A chill unfurled, a whispered dread, as shadows danced where courage fled. I knew at once. No time to plan, the storm was here. The chaos began. Flashback and POV ends. Everyone get down. Izuku's voice thundered through the hollow cavern, reverberating off the jagged walls. Without hesitation, he yanked Juhi to the ground as a searing yellow beam erupted from the priest's glowing eyes. The light slashed through the air like a blade, its intensity blinding. Most of the group's song, Kim, Park, and others scrambled out of its path, their movements frantic and desperate. But not everyone was so fortunate. Those caught in the beam's trajectory disintegrated in an instant, their screams snuffed out as ash scattered into the stale air. The beam ceased, leaving behind a glowing trail etched into the ground, curving ominously before disappearing into the darkness. A tense silence followed, broken only by the ragged breaths of the survivors. They exchanged shaking glances, each silently confirming the others were still alive. Then came the scream, a piercing, gut-wrenching cry from a woman kneeling over the charred remnants of a hand. Her voice cracked as she sobbed, her trembling fingers tracing the blackened edges of what was once a person. Juhi! Juhi! Izuku's head snapped toward her. She was crumpled on the ground, her body quaking with uncontrollable sobs. Her hands clutched her head as if trying to block out the horror. Please. No more. No more. She whimpered, her voice barely audible over her cries. Izuku's chest tightened, his breath hitching as he turned his gaze back to the priest. The figure stood motionless, eyes still ablaze with that unnatural yellow light, an aura of malice radiating from him. Panic clawed at Izuku's mind, his thoughts spiraling into chaos. What's happening? How is this even possible? We're trapped. There's no way out. This is it. We're done for. Dead. We're all going to die. His heart pounded in his chest like a war drum, each beat a grim reminder of the nightmare unfolding around them. Just what is that thing? The temple descended into chaos, a cacophony of panicked shouts ricocheting off the ancient stone walls. Fear clung to the air like a suffocating fog, making every breath feel heavier. We need to get out of here, someone shouted, their voice cracking under the weight of terror. It was the unspoken plea on everyone's mind. Are you insane? Another retorted, trembling visibly. That's a death sentence. The group splintered, lobbing frantic questions at one another like drowning sailors grasping for lifeboats. What the hell's supposed to do now? Is there another exit? How should I know? 2 of us are already gone. The word struck like a hammer blow, silencing the group momentarily. The atmosphere thickened, the oppressive weight of their situation pressing down as if the walls themselves were closing in. Panic ignited like dry tinder, spreading uncontrollably. Eyes darted wildly, scanning for an escape route that didn't exist. Trembling hands gripped weapons that felt pitifully inadequate against the towering stone monstrosity casting its shadow over them. During the chaos, Song stood his ground. His jaw clenched, his eyes blazing with determination. He drew in a deep, steadying breath, his chest rising as he summoned every ounce of strength. Enough! He bellowed, his voice slicing through the turmoil like a blade, silencing the room in an instant. His gaze swept across the frightened faces, his tone sharp and commanding. Stay down, all of you, he ordered, his voice low but forceful. If you move, it'll strike again. Understand? No one dared to disobey. The memory of the statue's destructive beam lingered in their minds, freezing them in place. The pounding of their hearts filled the suffocating silence, echoing like a drumbeat against the cold stone walls. The air felt thick and tense, while shadows flickered and danced, giving the ancient carvings a sinister, almost malevolent life. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. The silence pressed down on them, broken only by the occasional whimper or shaky breath. Eyes darted nervously between Song, the ominous statue, and the lifeless remains of their fallen companions, a grim reminder of the razor-thin line between survival and death. There was no escape, no reprieve. Their lives dangled by a thread, death lurking just a heartbeat away. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath them, a low rumble reverberating through the chamber. Dust sifted down from the ceiling, and small stones skittered across the floor. The statue's eyes flared brighter, casting an eerie, golden-yellow glow over the terrified group. It's going to fire again, someone whispered, their voice trembling with fear. Song's eyes narrowed, his voice a sharp hiss. Nobody move. Not an inch. The rumbling intensified, the walls vibrating with an unnatural, otherworldly energy. The oppressive silence was shattered by a soft, heart-wrenching sob. Jui sat trembling, tears streaming down her face. I can't do this, she whimpered, her voice barely audible. Beside her, Izuku stretched out a trembling hand, his fingers brushing hers. He gave her hand a reassuring squeeze, though his voice wavered as he whispered, "We'll make it through this." He wasn't sure he believed his own words. The statue's head began to move, its gaze sweeping across the room like a predator searching for its prey. Everyone held their breath, their bodies stiff with fear, silently praying they wouldn't be the next target. As the glowing eyes passed over the group, Song's mind raced. There had to be a weakness, a way out of this nightmare. His thoughts churned, desperate for a solution. Sweat trickled down his face, his heart hammering in his chest. Every second stretched into eternity, the weight of the moment almost unbearable. The statue's gaze continued its hunt, its deadly presence looming over them like a shadow of death. Song glanced at Izuku and Juhi, their fear written plainly across their faces. Determined, he began to crawl toward them, his movements slow and deliberate, his every action calculated. There had to be a way to end this. There had to be hope. He reached the two and placed a firm hand on Izuku's shoulder. "Mr. Song," Izuku exclaimed, startled. Juhi gets scared easily, Song explained, his voice calm but serious. That's why she only participates in sample raids, even though she's AB rank healer. And judging by the looks of this place, his gaze shifted to the stoned priest looming before them. It's anything but simple. It only targets those who moved. Everyone who ducked, like you suggested, survived. "Oh, I see," Izuku murmured, piecing it together. Song's eyes narrowed slightly. "How did you know that would happen?" he asked. "I just had a feeling it might be dangerous, Mr. Song." "Your arm," Izuku shouted, his voice rising in alarm. Song's arm was caught in the blast, bleeding from the wound. "I'll live," Song said with a strained but steady tone. "Just tell me stop the bleeding." Fortunately, someone had bandages on hand and quickly wrapped the bleeding stump of the arm. "So, Midoriya, what's your take on the rank of that creature?" "Most likely S rank or higher," Izuku replied thoughtfully. "I'm just speculating since I've only encountered low-rank magic beasts before, but I'd wager even national rank hunters would struggle or worse, perish in this dungeon." Song narrowed his eyes as he listened intently. "There's something I remember from the commandments," he began. "It states, 'Thou shalt worship the God. Thou shalt praise the God. Thou shalt prove thy faith. Those who fail to obey these commandments shall not be spared." Izuku's expression grew serious. "Mr. Song, are you suggesting that the God mentioned on the tablet refers to that statue of the high priest?" "Exactly," he replied. "But are you sure you'll be okay? Your arm is still bleeding." "I'll manage," Song assured him. "Besides, Juhi is unavailable, and the squad's morale is at an all-time low." Someone eagerly announced their induction into a major guild, boasting loudly about their newfound status. Brimming with confidence, they sprinted toward the double doors, certain their speed would carry them through. Instead, they disintegrated mid-stride, leaving only their feet behind as a grim reminder of their overconfidence. That priest will use that beam to instantly kill anyone who moves. If it misses, the gatekeeper by the doors can decapitate us. "We're nothing but rats in a trap," Izuku thought, his eyes widening as they darted back to the tablet. "They attack in patterns. Rules. The commandments, they're the rules governing this temple." Izuku suddenly stood, his abrupt motion drawing Song's sharp gaze. "What are you doing?" Song hissed, panic lacing his voice. "The commandments dictate the rules of this dungeon," Izuku said, his tone steady and resolute. "Have you lost your me?" Song's retort died in his throat when he caught the unwavering determination in Izuku's eyes. A realization dawned on him. He's not giving up. Not yet. "They're not attacking just because we're moving," Izuku muttered under his breath, his sharp gaze fixed on the priest as it readied another strike. Without hesitation, he dropped to his knees. The priest's glowing eyes flickered, dimming back to a muted yellow. "It only attacks if we're at a certain height," Izuku thought, his mind racing as clarity struck. "I figured out the first commandment. Everyone, the giant statue." Izuku's voice rang out, cutting through the tension like a blade. "What?" Kim barked, his voice a mix of confusion and disbelief. "What the hell are you talking about?" Park shouted. "Have you lost your marbles, Midoriya?" Kim added, his voice rising. "Hear the kid out." Song's voice thundered, silencing the others. His eyes locked on Izuku. "You've figured something out, haven't you?" "Yes," Izuku confirmed, his voice firm. "It only attacks if we're at a certain height. If we bow on our hands and knees, it stops." Thou shalt worship the god. It's a literal command. Without hesitation, Izuku bowed deeply before the towering statue. Song hesitated. You're acting on a hunch, he said, his tone skeptical but tinged with hope. Yes, Izuku admitted, his voice unwavering. But it's the only chance we have. As they bowed, the tension in the room was suffocating. Sweat glistened on foreheads, and hearts thundered in chests as all eyes remained fixed on the motionless figure. Each person silently praying Izuku's instincts were right. Then, like a candle flickering in its final moments, the eerie glow in the stone high priest's eyes began to fade, dimming until only cold, lifeless stone remained. But just as a collective sigh of relief began to ripple through the group, the unimaginable happened. The statue's face shifted, its once stoic expression twisted unnervingly, the rigid features softening into a smile. It wasn't a smile of kindness or peace, it was a vile, predatory grin, dripping with cruel anticipation, as though savoring their fear like a delicacy. That's creepy as hell, Park murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. His wide eyes betrayed the terror clawing at his insides as he stared at the grotesque transformation. Izuku's sharp gaze locked onto the statue, his mind racing. The expression had changed. He muttered, his voice taut with urgency. Every detail of the statue's new visage screamed of danger, and his instincts screamed louder. It stopped attacking, Park added, his words tinged with a fragile relief. His shoulders sagged slightly, but the unease clung to him like a shadow, refusing to let go. A cautious wave of hope began to spread through the squad. Muted whispers of gratitude and hesitant smiles flickered across their faces, the faintest spark of optimism igniting in the oppressive air. For a fleeting moment, they believed the worst had passed. But Izuku felt it in his bones something was wrong. His eyes narrowed, catching the subtle shifts in the statue's stance. The stone wasn't just still, it was alive, the rigid surface rippling as if muscles coiled beneath its rocky exterior. And then it hit him, a surge of dread that sent his heart hammering. The statue wasn't done, it was preparing to rise. With mounting horror, he saw the massive form begin to stir, its hulking frame tensing as it prepared to rise. It's not over, Izuku shouted, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. Every nerve in his body braced for the nightmare about to unfold. The air grew dense, charged with a sinister energy that pressed down on them like an invisible weight. Whatever came next, it would be worse. Much worse. The temple shuddered violently, ancient stone groaning under the strain. Dust and debris rained down from the cracking ceiling, creating a hazy veil in the air. The stone priest, once motionless, began to rise with agonizing slowness. Its movements were deliberate and menacing, like a predator savoring the moment before it pounced on its prey. Midoriya, Song's voice cut through the chaos, tinged with desperation. Do you have any more ideas? His eyes darted between the rising statue and Izuku, hope and fear warring in his expression. Izuku's mind raced, adrenaline sharpening his thoughts. We already followed the first commandment. He shouted back, his voice hoarse from the dust-filled air. Next, we need to praise the god. The words had barely left his lips when a figure emerged from the shadows. A man, his face etched with determination, stepped forward. I used to sing in the church choir, he announced, his voice steady despite the trembling ground beneath their feet. Without hesitation, he began to pray, his rich baritone echoing off the chamber walls. The words, meant to be soothing, took on an eerie quality in the dim, dust-filled room. For a moment, it seemed as if his plan might work. But Izuku's keen eyes caught something the others missed. The priest's stone face, once impassive, began to twist. What started as a smile quickly morphed into something far more sinister. A grotesque grin that sent chills down Izuku's spine. No! Izuku's scream tore from his throat, raw with horror. He's praying to the wrong god. His warning came too late. The statue, previously moving with glacial slowness, suddenly burst into action. Its massive foot rose and fell with terrifying speed, A boulder dropped from a great height. There was a sickening crunch, a cut-off scream, and then silence. Where the man had stood, there was now only a spreading pool of crimson, stark against the dusty stone floor. The air hung heavy with shock and the metallic scent of blood. Izuku's heart hammered in his chest, his mind reeling from the sudden, brutal loss of life. The reality of their situation crashed down upon him with renewed force. One wrong move, one misinterpretation, and they could all share the same fate. Chaos erupted as the statue continued its relentless advance. The air filled with dust and the acrid scent of fear as panic seized the group. They scattered like leaves in a storm, their screams echoing off the ancient stone walls. Park's eyes were wide with terror, his thoughts a frantic jumble. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he gasped for breath. I can't die like this, he thought, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. I've got family waiting for me. The image of his young daughter's smiling face flashed through his mind, giving him a desperate surge of strength. He spotted a shadowy alcove, a small recess in the wall that seemed to promise safety. Without hesitation, he made a desperate dash for it, his legs burning with the effort. I should be safe over here, right? He muttered, hope and fear warring in his voice. His fingers scraped against the rough stone as he pressed himself into the alcove, trying to make himself as small as possible. But fate had other plans. The temple seemed to shift and groan around them, as if alive and hungry for it. Kim's voice cut through the chaos, a desperate warning that sent chills down Park's spine. Hey, Park, behind you. Park turned, his movement agonizingly slow. Time seemed to stretch like taffy, each second an eternity. His eyes widened in horror as he caught sight of the stone knight, its blank face betraying no emotion as its blade was already in motion. The torchlight glinted off the stone edge, mesmerizing in its deadly beauty. There was a sickening sound of stone cutting through flesh, a noise Park never thought he'd hear. His world exploded into pain, every nerve ending screaming in agony. He felt a strange weightlessness, as if he were floating. Then, mercifully, nothing at all. Park! Kim's anguished cry echoed through the chamber, a raw testament to the horror unfolding before them. The sound was primal, filled with grief and rage, bouncing off the walls and seeming to shake the very foundations of the temple. Amidst the mayhem, Izuku's hand shot out, grabbing Juhi's trembling fingers with a grip that was both desperate and protective. Her skin was cold and clammy against his palm, a stark contrast to the heat radiating from the chaos around them. He pulled her along with a force that spoke of urgency and determination. They ran, their footsteps reverberating through the cavernous chamber, the sound mingling with the cacophony of crumbling stone, panicked screams, and the guttural roars of the stone guardians. Debris rained down from above, sharp fragments slicing through the air, while the flailing limbs of panicked raiders created a deadly obstacle course. Izuku's mind raced, a storm of thoughts crashing against each other as he tried to make sense of their dire situation. His breaths came in short, sharp gasps, his chest heaving with exertion as he pushed his body to its absolute limits. Praise God! Praise God! He muttered under his breath, the words tumbling out like a mantra, though his tone was anything but reverent. His brow furrowed deeply, beads of sweat trickling down his temple and stinging his eyes as he racked his brain for a solution. What is there to praise about that thing? It's basically a devil. He spat, his voice tinged with frustration and fear. A quick glance over his shoulder brought his heart to its knees. Juhi's face, streaked with tears, bore the weight of sheer terror. The salty rivulets carved clean tracks through the dust and grime that clung to her skin. Her sobs were uncontrollable, racking her frail body and causing her to stumble with every step. Her wide, unfocused eyes darted around, searching for an escape that didn't exist. She looked like a fragile bird caught in a storm, her spirit teetering on the edge of breaking. Despite the overwhelming danger, despite every primal instinct screaming at him to save himself, Izuku couldn't let go. The very thought of abandoning her was more horrifying than the monstrous stone creatures closing in on them. I can't leave Juhi alone, he thought, the conviction in his mind stealing his resolve. He tightened his grip on her hand, feeling the frantic pulse in her fingertips that matched the erratic drumming of his own heart. It was a silent promise, one that said he would protect her no matter the cost. As they darted through the chaos, dodging falling debris and the deadly swings of the Stone Guardian's massive weapons, Izuku's mind worked overtime. There had to be a way out, a solution hidden within the madness. The commandments, they held the key. He was certain of it. But could he decipher their meaning before death claimed them? His thoughts churned like a raging storm, every possibility and fragment of memory colliding in a desperate bid for clarity. His eyes scanned the chamber, absorbing every detail with a frantic intensity. The towering statues, the intricate carvings on the walls, the scattered remnants of past adventurers, all of it could hold the answer. Then his gaze froze, locking onto a statue, clutching an ornate lyre. Instruments. The realization hit him like a bolt of lightning, cutting through the fog of panic. The commandments mention music and harmony, and something about the Song of Salvation, maybe a hint for the third commandment. Everyone, Izuku's voice sliced through the chaos, sharp and commanding, carrying a weight that demanded attention. To the statues with instruments. His shout was a beacon of hope amidst the despair, though it was met with confusion. Song, standing a few feet away, turned to him with a furrowed brow. Doubt and hope warred in his expression, his voice hesitant as he echoed. Instruments? Uncertainty threaded through his tone, but something in Izuku's unwavering gaze compelled him to act. He moved toward a statue clutching a trumpet, his steps cautious yet deliberate. As he approached, the cold, lifeless stone seemed to stir. The statue's lips parted, and a haunting melody began to weave through the air, soft yet piercing, cutting through the din like a blade. "It's playing?" Song whispered, his eyes widening in astonishment. The melody was otherworldly, its ethereal notes resonating deep within his chest. He turned to the others, his voice rising with urgency. "The statues with instruments, they're safe. They won't attack." A ripple of relief swept through the group, their faces lighting up with a glimmer of hope they hadn't dared to feel. They scattered, each person sprinting toward a musical statue, as if their lives depended on it, because they did. The chamber came alive with an eerie symphony, the statues shimmering with an unearthly glow as their spectral music filled the air. The chamber pulsated with an eerie symphony, the statues shimmering with an otherworldly glow as their spectral music filled the air. Izuku and Juhi dashed toward a statue gripping a massive drum, their footsteps echoing off the stone walls. "Play," Izuku urged, his voice taut with urgency. "Please play your music." But the statue remained still, its eyes dull and lifeless. Panic coiled within Izuku's chest, threatening to suffocate him. Why isn't it working? He thought frantically. Is it because there are two of us? He turned to Juhi, and their eyes locked his blue one's earnest, her expression frightened yet resolute. "Stay here," he commanded firmly, reassuringly. Without waiting for her response, he bolted toward another statue, his footsteps thundering against the cold stone floor. "Izuku!" Juhi's voice trembled with fear, her heart pounding as she watched him race away. Suddenly, the drum statue beside her came to life, its eyes ablaze with an intense blue glow. The low, resonant thrum of its drum joined the spectral orchestra, sending a shiver racing up Juhi's spine. She gasped, her fear momentarily replaced by awe. "It worked," she whispered, clutching her chest, her gaze tracking Izuku's retreating form as she silently willed him to safety. "Run." That was all Izuku could do as the high priest's gaze locked onto him, its stone eyes burning with malice. He sprinted forward, lungs burning, narrowly dodging a thunderous stomp that left a crater in its wake. The ground shook beneath him, nearly throwing him off balance. "Wrong way." Song's voice cut through the din, panic evident in his tone. That's not an instrument. Izuku's eyes darted left, catching a glimpse of a statue of a woman with angelic wings. Hope flared briefly within him. Could this be his salvation? But as he turned back to face what lay ahead, despair sank in. A statue wielding a shield loomed before him, its stone face twisted in a grotesque grin. Before Izuku could react, the shield-wielding figure slammed its weapon down with a deafening boom, directly in his path. The impact sent him sprawling, his body hurtling through the air like a rag doll. "No! Izuku!" Juhi's scream echoed through the chamber as Izuku's body skidded across the ground, leaving a trail of vital fluid in his wake. The sight of his crumpled form sent a wave of despair crashing over the group, their faces pale with shock and fear. Izuku lay there, battered and broken, pain radiating through every fiber of his being. "Instruments," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "Instruments. If there is a God, please make it stop." The words tore from his throat, raw with anguish and desperation. As darkness began to creep into his vision, a strange sense of resignation washed over him. Between life and death, he thought, his mind growing hazy, "I've been playing this dangerous game of tug-of-war for so long. And now I guess it's finally over." His eyes fluttered shut, ready to surrender to the encroaching darkness. But fate had other plans. Through the haze of pain and despair, a sound reached Izuku's ears, an angelic and serene voice calling to him from above. The high priest, poised to deliver the final blow, suddenly froze. "Ha ha!" Izuku wheezed out a chuckle, a mixture of relief and disbelief washing over him. His eyes cracked open, searching for the source of the heavenly voice that had seemingly saved him from the brink of death. "Are you all right, Izuku?" A voice called out, laden with desperation, cutting through the thick haze of dust and tension. Juhi's voice cracked as she shouted, her words trembling with urgency. "Yeah, I guess," Izuku murmured, his words faint, fragile, barely audible over the pounding in his ears. His body swayed, unsteady, as if the very act of speaking had drained what little strength he had left. Juhi dashed toward him, her boots skidding slightly on the uneven ground, but she froze mid-step. Her breath caught in her throat, and her hands flew to her mouth as her eyes widened in sheer horror. Silent tears began to cascade down her cheeks, their path glinting faintly in the dim light of the chamber. "Oh no," she whispered, her voice quivering, the words barely escaping her lips. Izuku's gaze, sluggish and unfocused, drifted downward. His vision swam, but the grisly reality before him snapped sharply into focus. His breath hitched, his chest tightening as his eyes locked on the grotesque sight. Something vital, something intrinsic, was missing. "Oh," he muttered, his tone hollow, almost detached, as if his mind refused to fully process the horror. "Your leg," Juhi choked out, her voice cracking with disbelief and anguish. The words seemed to echo endlessly in the cavernous space. His right leg was gone, severed cleanly just below the knee. The jagged edges of the wound were raw, a stark contrast against the pale, clammy skin of his remaining limb. Juhi fell to her knees beside him, her hands trembling as she hovered them over the wound. Summoning every ounce of her will, she began to concentrate on healing him, pouring the last remnants of her mana into his battered body. A faint, golden glow emanated from her palms, flickering like a dying flame. Suddenly, Juhi's eyes widened, her pupils dilating in alarm. A violent cough racked her frame, and crimson droplets splattered onto the dusty floor beneath her. Her body shuddered, her face turning ashen as the toll of her mana depletion became painfully evident. She swayed, barely able to remain upright, her breaths coming in shallow, ragged gasps. Before anyone could react, the ground beneath them began to tremble violently. A deep, menacing rumble reverberated through the chamber, shaking loose small stones and sending a chill down their spines. The group's attention snapped to the high priest, a looming figure whose stone visage remained cold and unyielding. Its massive hand, carved with ancient symbols, began to rise slowly but deliberately. The air around them grew heavy, crackling with an unnatural energy that made their skin prickle. Before their astonished eyes, an altar began to materialize from the very earth itself. The structure emerged with an almost sentient purpose, its creation accompanied by a low, otherworldly hum. What rose before them was both mesmerizing and terrifying, a grand, double-ring platform that seemed to defy the natural order. The surface of the altar was intricately carved with runes, their patterns pulsating faintly with an eerie, otherworldly light that shifted between shades of crimson and violet. The outer ring formed a broad, imposing base, encircling a smaller, elevated platform at its center. The entire structure was forged from a dark, polished stone that seemed to absorb the dim glow of the chamber, exuding an oppressive, shadowy aura that weighed heavily on the group's spirits. The group froze, their movements stilled by a mix of awe and dread. Some instinctively stepped back, their breaths catching in their throats, while others leaned forward, unable to suppress their morbid curiosity despite the fear flickering in their eyes. The oppressive silence that followed was broken only by the faint hum of the altar, a sound that seemed to resonate deep within their chests. An altar, Izuku murmured, his voice barely audible but laced with unease. All eyes turned toward him, their gazes heavy with expectation and fear. He swallowed hard, his throat dry, and steadied himself as he continued. Throughout history and myth, altars like this have been used for sacrifices to the gods. His gaze swept over his companions, noting the dawning horror etched across their faces. The weight of his words pressed down on them like a suffocating fog. Blood sacrifices, he clarified, his voice gaining strength despite the pain coursing through him. Animals, cattle, pigs, sheep, and sometimes even humans. A collective shudder rippled through the group. The implications of his statement, sinking in like a lead weight, dropped into still water. The oppressive air grew thicker, pressing down on them like an invisible hand, the tension almost unbearable. Shadows seemed to stretch and twist along the ancient stone walls, as if the room itself recoiled from the truth being spoken. Izuku's voice dropped lower, heavy with the gravity of his words, each syllable falling like a hammer on their ears. Children, virgins. They were offered right on platforms like this, he said, gesturing toward the crumbling altar before them. Their lives are given to appease or gain favor from the gods. The silence that followed was deafening, a void filled only by the faint sound of their breathing and the distant drip of water echoing through the chamber. The air felt thick, charged with tension and unspoken fear, as if the very atmosphere rebelled against the horrors being unearthed. Izuku's gaze fell on the altar once more, his eyes narrowing as his mind raced to piece together the puzzle before them, the jagged edges of history cutting into his thoughts. And so, he continued, his voice quiet but intense, the weight of realization pressing down on him. The third and final commandment is... He paused, the words catching in his throat as the full implications hit him like a tidal wave. His hand clenched into a fist at his side, the enormity of the truth almost too much to bear. Song, standing beside him, stepped forward with a grim determination etched into his face. His expression was tight, his jaw set as if bracing himself against the storm of understanding that had just broken over them. His voice, steady but laced with a foreboding chill, filled the heavy silence. "Thou shalt prove thy faith," he said, the words hanging in the air like a blade poised to drop. The chill in his tone sent shivers through the group, the weight of the commandment sinking into their hearts like ice. So, this was the end of part 1 of this series. Stay tuned for next part of this series, and if you like this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel.